that we would listen and be able to understand and know your word. These things we pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Okay, so let's see what I have up here. To recap kind of, our introduction last week, this is up at the top is our working, class purpose statement. So discussions that will equip and inspire the church to raise up faithful young people in the current generation. And so this week we're talking about young people in the current generation, who that is. I apologize. Today's going to be a lot of information. I really want this class to be discussion based. I don't know that we're going to have time for a lot of discussion today. This is going to be primarily of just kind of learning the language. We talked about last week Acts 2 versus Acts 17 and how Peter speaks to the Jewish community differently than Paul speaks to the Areopagus, the Greek community who knows nothing about Jesus. And as we'll see here in a little bit, I've said before, we are living in a post-Christian culture. Most of our young people today have never really stepped foot in a church building, and so it's interesting, the numbers and stuff out there. So we're speaking the language. I believe I have this. Yeah. There's a book that we're going to talk more about later on called Growing Young. It was a book written by Fuller Youth Institute, some researchers at Fuller Youth Institute. And they interviewed, 500 churches or something to ask about, what they are doing that the churches that have a vibrant, active, large amount of young people. And by young people, they specifically are talking about teenagers up through college students, and even kind of post-graduation type things. And they're just trying to figure out, what are the things that you're doing that have these young people engaged, activated, part of your church. The second core commitment that they've kind of found in all of these churches was that they empathize with today's young people. They take time to listen and see where the young people are at. And so today we're just going to be talking about how we empathize and talking about who this generation is, and try to find ways that we can, just see into their world, step in their shoes, feel what they're feeling a little bit and understand why that is. I'm going to start with stuff from, it's called the Strauss and Howe generational theory. It's just stepping back a little bit to a big picture thing and to see where this generation falls in this cycle, which I'm going to just explain a little bit more here in a second, and why they are experiencing what they're experiencing. So Strauss and Howe had this idea. They wrote a book in 1997 called The Fourth Turning. You can write it down in your bibliography here in a second if you want to look at more of this, but you can go to fourthturning.com, I believe is what it is. And basically they just researched, history, anthropology, sociology throughout the ages, and saw what they described as four cycles, a cycle of four turnings. A high, an awakening, an unraveling, and a crisis. It reached back all the way to the 1430s in Anglo-Saxon history. So all the way back into the England and stuff. Starting with the Tudors, I believe, is where they start. But it consists of these four quadrants, and the way that they are. A quadrant is defined is not so much by the events that happen within that section of time, but the way society is reacting to the events. And so the high, there's this established order of things, this new society that's been fixed is secured and founded. And then an awakening happens. It's typically I don't know. I borrowed this. They did a terrible job of picking colors, but this awakening happens. It's a period that's typically very spiritually led, not necessarily Christian, but spiritual awakening of things, questioning of the order that's been established. Unraveling happens. Let's take this established order and start to dissect why it's actually working. And then a crisis, because everything's been dismantled. There's kind of this crisis era that comes about. And typically these last about a full cyclum is about 80 years. So 20 years in each of these turnings. So how does this look over our last 6 generations? So here's the last 4. And it kind of puts you right where we're at in the middle of the bottom one, the crisis right now. That's what we're in. So the high started post World War II, 1946 through 1964. That was led by, we'll see, the GIs, the Great Generation, those who kind of led the front through the latter part of the Depression on into World War II. What happens after that is this, reestablished order, right? The 50s and this suburbanization of things, and then everyone kind of this new society was created in the U.S. Those born during that time are the boomers. We'll see kind of the age. The cyclum always predates the archetype. So Strauss and Howe have these 4 archetypes that are born every generation or every cycle. Prophets or boomers come in during a high. They're born during a high. So they call them baby boomers because society's great. Goods are at an all new, good availability is at an all-time high, right? Like during the late 40s, 50s, 60s, everything was booming. Science was booming. Industry, it was this high time. So we call them baby boomers who are born during that time. Then the awakening happens, and you'll recognize this, 1964 through 1984, the new consciousness revolution, the spiritualization, New Age really takes a hold in the U.S. During that time, nomads are born they come into childhood, or Gen X, so those born 64 to 84. Well, it's a little bit later than that. Then you get into the unraveling. So culture wars and things like that that began happening in the 80s and the 90s. During that time, the hero archetype is born, the millennials. We came into the world. And then the crisis comes along. This is from Strauss and Howe's website. They put the crisis beginning at 2008 with the housing market collapse. You can see the shift start to happen with 9/11. That's why we'll see here in a little bit the Gen Z, they kind of push their birth date back a little bit. And I would as well. So the crisis, and we'll explain more about this crisis in a minute, but that's really the most important thing. So crisis happens, we get into the cycle, and Gen Z is growing up in a time of crisis. We'll describe that more here in a second. This is the last 6 generations in order. So there's the heroes, those who were born 1901 to 1924, once again, are the GI generation. They're the ones who grew up whenever, roaring 20s is kind of happening, and they're coming onto the scene. And then the Depression hits, World War II comes along, and heroes are in young adulthood at that time. So they're the ones literally on the front line of World War II, right? They're the ones taking the brunt of the Great Depression. After them, so they're in young adulthood, silents are born into the scene from 1925 to 1942. So I have these lines on the side, kind of off on the side, but you'll see there's some similarities that the GIs, the Great Generation, and millennials have, and there's some similarities that Silence and Gen Z has, because it's a 4 turnings. Every 4th generation is going to come along the same. So GIs are heroes, millennials are heroes, Gen Z is, or it's the Silents are artists, Gen Z are artists are going to be the same, because silents grow up. They are in children whenever the Great Depression is being, is hitting the United States. They're children when dad goes off to war and mom goes off to work. They're children when there's this great societal movement from rural to urban that happens, post World War II. And so it's crisis for them, right? They grow up knowing crisis. So that's any of y'all in those, there you go. That's where you're at. So those of you who are born 1925 to 1942, you have an ability to empathize with Gen Z more than I do in some ways because of what you experienced growing up. So I think that's really neat. So GIs then have children. Those children are the boomers. Silents grow up, they have children. That's Gen X. Gen X grows up, or boomers grow up, they have millennials. Gen X grow up and they are primarily what we're seeing, or primarily Generation X are the parents of Gen Z. What's interesting about that, and this is way more information than you need right now. I just want to point out some things for like Gen Z and silence, if you notice on that second column. There's this idea of interdependency is a big deal because of growing up in a crisis, this need to rely upon each other and build a network is a big deal. Young adulthood, constantly looking to improve things. Gen Z, those who are like in college, those who are getting close to high school, they all have big dreams. I've not talked to someone who is like Gen Z and then not have like just a big idea of not just what they want to do with their life, but how they want to impact the world. They want to improve everything. Like they want to make everything better because once again, they've grown up in crisis. We'll talk more about it in a minute. Overprotective. So they're overprotected. That plays out interestingly with Gen Z. We'll talk about it more here in a minute. Negative reputation, sentimental, complicating, indecisive. Indecisive has been a big thing with Gen Z that people have been struggling with because once again, we'll see how that plays out more here in a second. See, they're experts on Gen Z are tech natives. We'll talk more about that here in a second, right? There's this, so silence grew up in a world that had was having new advancements come along and you were just native to that. Gen Z has grown up where there's just brand new technology, a smartphone, right? That literally everybody has in their pocket and they can use it better than I can. There's like 8-year-olds who can use it better. Endowments. So they've been born into a society that has had a high immigration rate. There's multiple cultures, worldviews, experiences that are happening around them, and the due process thing, I honestly don't get. So, but there's that. So this is what it looks like all together. We don't need to spend much time there, but you can see that there's the high, boomers are born, silents are young adults, heroes are in midlife. They're really kind of setting the tone for things. The urban, like I said, the suburban life comes into play. Was it Levittown, whatever, Levittown? Then the awakening, the 60s, there's the Kent State, Woodstock, things like that, the spiritual awakening, the new consciousness movement led by boomers. Whenever we get into the third turning with X or millennials coming on board, there's Morning America, culture wars, things like that. X was kind of abandoned. Gen X, the general tone was abandonment, and that's important to note because it affects how they parent. So Gen X, it's interesting. I'll look at the horror movies that came out in early 80s, late 70s, it all revolves around children being demons. And so that was the mindset of silent parents, really. That was like the cultural mindset of children are a burden, okay? And it kind of, that was the parenting kind of became a little bit like that. And so, yeah, if you've seen The Breakfast Club, that and depicts Gen X perfectly. Like they're on their own, left to figure out their problems. and they've got each other to work on those problems with. So when they grow up, they become overly what's the word? Overly. It's not overly like protective. It's overly present almost. And we'll talk more about that here in a second. But yeah, so X comes of age, then crisis begins. Strauss and Howe call Gen Z homelanders, but they're born post 9/11, and we'll see what that means. So what does this mean for Gen Z?
Dakota?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
I see this it's like a cycle that goes back from 4 to 1 again. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What kind of characteristics are in the transition between the crisis and the starting over?
Perfect.
What was the starting over?
High.
The high. Well, how does society get from the crisis to the high back again?
So Strauss and Howe's the theory they put forward, or the way that is there's a melt up at the end of a crisis, where things just start looking awful. Like I would say we're getting into the melt up of things, where it's crisis becomes more exaggerated. There doesn't really seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel. They talk about a great champion, who's a leader who comes along and kind of leads. Whether or not his leadership is appreciated by everyone, or if the reality of it is great, if everyone buys into the leadership, typically it will restart that cycle. They stress that if there's not a great champion, if the melt up doesn't happen properly, the cycle will collapse actually. So I say in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll see probably the end of this cycle. We'll see the melt up kind of reach its final point, and kind of a leveling off back down into a high.
Collapse.
Or a collapse. Yeah.
Can you send this PowerPoint out to us?
I can send out everything.
That'd be great.
I know there's a lot of information on here.
Thank
you.
And so there's like I said, the melt up at the end of the crisis, and really it'll determine kind of what's happened. This new society will be established. So you see it with, so like the great champion was FDR, who kind of, whether or not you liked what he did, he led society through crisis, and then the new society was established. The new high was founded after that. So what this directly means for Gen Z, like I said, they've grown up in a world of constant and increasing crisis since 9/11. So like I said, a good determining factor for who Gen Z is, or who a Gen Z person is, would be how they remember 9/11, or if they remember life before 9/11. So I can remember flying on a plane before 9/11. Right. And I remember taking my dad to the airport and getting to go past, like, there wasn't security. Like, we just got and saw him to the gate and things like that. And then and it's so different now than what it used to be. So there's been a crisis in Homeland Security, like down, a little bit further. There's been it baffled me up until a year ago. I mean, literally, we've been at war in the United States. Or we have been at war in the Middle East the entire time Gen Z has been alive. Like, that's wild. They have not known a time where there isn't not a military conflict in the Middle East. So in politics, right, politics have gotten worse and worse and worse, just as far as weaponization and belittling of other people, and it's just become so combative. But they've been witnessing this, right? They're not on the voting stage, but they're watching. Their parents are watching adults. They're seeing this crisis and this hatred that kind of boils up in that. Religion, so like crisis in religion, right? We in a post-Christian world. The fastest growing religious affiliation until 2 years ago was none. Christian has actually started to come back a little bit, but it's been in competition with Islam. Financial institutions nationally and globally have been in crisis since, for as long as I can remember. It starts in 2008. And so that was the point. So here's a big marker. I remember immediately after 9/11, the cultural reaction was community, right? It was a drawing together. When the housing market collapsed and the financial crisis starts, starts to become a little more individualistic. The response. There's not the community culturally abroad the mentality culturally isn't so much community driven anymore. It's a little more individualistic driven. Yeah.
I think we attribute that perhaps maybe to the fact that we couldn't point to a particular enemy in the housing market.
The idea of a faceless enemy is a big deal. Especially when we look at like cybersecurity, right? And like you don't know who the enemy is, right? That's crisis. It's this mentality of like we don't know, we're afraid and we don't know why. We don't know who to be afraid of. And so finances breakdown. You've seen how media has become more predatory and violent upon people and accusatory. Healthcare, especially, over the last, 2 years, 3 years, there's just, with the pandemic and not sure what the right messaging is, that's an effect of crisis in the media. So there's crisis in healthcare, there's crisis in relationships, marriage, the rate of divorce. Some said 50% a few years back, and we realized that was way overestimated. That's probably closer to like 30%. But marriage relationships aren't sticking, right? And once again, these are kids watching parents not know how to deal with marriage, right? And that core relationship that should help them define other relationships isn't being cemented in their minds. It's not a fixed picture in their minds. It's really kind of a shattered image. And so there's a crisis in relationships, crisis in identity, with gender identity and things like that happening. It creates this just, kaleidoscope of like, well, I don't know if I fit into any of these pockets. And you got to try and figure that out. There's so much to try and figure out. So it's a crisis for them. We hear of the climate crisis, right? Like we're going to be dead in 10 years because of things, right? And so
although to be fair, that claim has been around for about the last 40 years.
Sure. But it's become so much more prevalent and so much more impressed upon this generation. You look at like Greta Thunberg, right? Who's grown up and she's terrified because she's convinced that we're all going to die in a few years. So I'll ask you this: what sort of mindset do you think this gives to a child?
Topsy-turvy.
What was it? What did you say?
Anything but scared.
Scared? I heard some say fearful.
Topsy-turvy.
Yeah, fearful, topsy-turvy.
Enjoy the moment.
Enjoy the moment because you don't know how long it's going to last. You can see why our kids have so much an issue with anxiety and depression, right? Because their life is just a wreck, and because the constant messaging of their life is a wreck. Another thing that they're growing up in, the world they're growing up is tech-driven. There's been an interesting increase and decrease in socialization. I heard some of y'all talking about this earlier, right? Like there's the ability to sit down and have a face-to-face conversation seems to be lost. What I noticed, and it surprises me, is I'm trying to talk to someone who's Gen Z, and I don't think they're listening because they're on their phone the whole time. But they're able to reply with something profound at times in our conversation. And so they have this weird ability to multitask at times if they really want to. It's a teenager, you got to work with them on their willingness to participate. But there is this sort of isolation, and especially over lockdown and stuff like that, where this being able to socialize is a bit weird for them, but they were tech native, so they were able to socialize online. So there's this increase, and typically it's not uncommon, and so parents be aware of this, it's not uncommon for Gen Z to be able to communicate with multiple people in different countries, right? Like that they do that regularly, daily. They're exposed to other cultures constantly. Previously, unimaginable access to information and resources, like what used to require you owning a set of Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannica on your shelf, is now in your pocket, right? Like you can just Google anything, look it up on Wikipedia. And so there's no end to what they can learn through their phone, right? No end to it. They have incredible resources to be able to do I'm not a big fan of TikTok. I just don't enjoy it. I think it's bad for like our mental processing. But it's incredible how many kids can put together a TikTok. Like they just record it and are able to edit it and do all this. And like, I don't know how to do that. I don't care to know how to do that. But it's incredible the resources they have to be able to do things. And then with that, reach millions of people with it instantly. That's crazy.
Just to interject something here regarding the access to information, although it is there, it does not automatically mean that they are interested in that information.
Yes, yeah,
As a teacher, I realize, they have unprecedented access, but that doesn't mean they have unprecedented desire to learn.
Exactly. Yeah.
That has to be instilled and or encouraged and or, motivated.
Yeah. So the education is customizable and entertainment is customizable, right? You can find, over the pandemic, once again, we learned like we can make education, shape it to how we want it to be. Entertainment, you can find, if you're bored with one thing, you open up a different page and you find something else to entertain you. That's my issue with TikTok is we shouldn't be switching gears that fast, but, virtual abuse and exploitation. So that's the pitfall to tech-driven landscape, right? We might have this information access, but it's so easy for predators to be able to get information on our young people, to be able to just send them things that they shouldn't be sending. But an exploitation of our children in ways that it's just really frightening. So I'm always we don't put like pictures of our kids literally on Facebook or anything. Like it scares us. Like it just makes us nervous about what's going to happen with that information. Gen Z is growing up in a world of excessive surveillance and lack of protection. This is what I was talking about earlier. There's been this idea with Gen X parents that being present is as good as being in tune. Does that make sense? Like, as long as my kid's sitting there and I can see them, they're good. They may be on their iPad or whatever, and I'm not actually having a conversation with them, but they're there, they're with me, right? And so that's been a big issue in parenting, of just constantly being there, but not really plugging in with students. Schools has kind of been a little bit of the same thing. It's interesting what some students have said in some of this research of like our parents, our teachers and whoever is there, but they don't talk to us much. It's been an interesting thing. By the government. This kind of goes back to 9/11 and the whole like Patriot Act thing, right? Like the government has incredible access and knowledge of what everyone's doing through technology, especially our young people through technology, but there isn't protection happening. If they have this access to information, they should be, it's interesting they're not having a protection there. Yeah.
In the field that I work in behavioral health, we have seen a huge increase in suicidal ideation by teens and as young as age 5. We've actually seen age 5, a high increase in parents calling for that age group saying that their child has suicidal ideation. They use other words, but that's what it is. And I think it's very much due to what you're talking about with the lack of parenting.
Sure.
Because they are getting most of their ideas of society from the internet and the things
Yes.
that they're doing on those, laptops and things versus the parents themselves. And then the parents are shocked when
Yeah.
the child's thinking about suicide.
Yeah. It's kind of like, well, you should have had this conversation, or you need to be more plugged in. Yeah, exactly. So we see this happening of kids developing a worldview and in a frame of mind without really any like adult help. There's a reason that we're talking about, us raising up young people. We need to be involved in helping them develop a worldview. It's interesting. Most young people have a worldview fully developed in their brain by age 13. And so if we're trying to help them develop a worldview after that, it's going to be a much more difficult. And what I mean by worldview is putting a Christian lens on the way they see the world. If not, it's going to be their friends, their media, school, whatever it is, helping them develop their worldview. We need to be at the forefront of that. Yeah, Jack.
So I have noticed that you've concentrated very much on the concept of communication.
Mm-hmm.
How important is communication? I know as I'm probably part of the silent generation, right?
Yeah, sure.
Well, back in those days, it was direct communication. We talked to each other.
Yeah.
And is that a lacking in these days and times when we do all of our talking like this?
Yes, to an extent. It's interesting on your homework sheet. I've got some suggestions of YouTube videos. You don't have to go watch them. They're just there if you'd like to. Of Gen Z talking about it, and one of them is with an interview by from LinkedIn with someone who's in Gen Z, and he said, if it's our employer, if it's someone who is investing in us, we want a face-to-face communication, right? It's wanted, right? We'll see in a minute, there's a dissonance though, because there's this desire for it and this inability to know how to make that happen, right? And I would go back to the parenting thing of parents haven't modeled how to sit and have a conversation. They've been, play on your phone or whatever. And so there's this issue of not sure how to actually engage in a face-to-face conversation, but they want it. Does that make sense? So it leads us up to helping them learn how to do that and taking the time to make that happen.
So they know that there's a need at some occasion, but they don't really know how to do it.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's why they leave you on red. That's why they leave you on red on your phone.
Yeah. If you send a message and you can see if they've read it or not. Yeah. So the world they're growing up in is increasingly diverse and globally aware. Like I said, there's been an increase in immigration in the U.S. over the last 20 years, right? In unprecedented amounts. So we'll see in a minute, most of our students are accustomed, it's natural for them to know people of different ethnicities, multiple people of multiple different ethnicities. That's not a bad thing. It's just, it creates some issues of how does a worldview work in a culturally different world, right? We'll see that here in a second. They have access to knowledge of international politics and cultural practices outside of the U.S. Once again, that's due to, technology and being able to look up any information you want. TikTok and Instagram are really good about, hey, here's this issue that's happening in this other country. You need to be worried about it, and switching to something else, right? So they know, they can see that there's these other things happening in the world, in the US and other cultures, and they can see the issues that are happening. What's good about this is it makes them, like I said, they want to do something, but it makes them very empathetic and very willing to help other people out. They have a desire for that. So what's the active effect of this on Gen Z? Once again, I know this is a lot of information. I can email out all these slides and more if you want. Just let me know if you want more than this or if you want just this, and I'll get it all to you. The Fuller Youth Institute says it's a later finish line and an earlier starting line. So we've seen this prolonging of adulthood, right? Or into putting off of going into adulthood. So a later finish line, and typical adulthood markers have been pushed back. Marriage, family, completed education, steady job, financial independence. Those are all being pushed back. And the cause they have for that is it's a multitude of opportunities available and an experience of making big decisions. So there's so many things that can happen that they can go and they can do. And then it's like, well, I kind of want to explore that. I want to explore this. I want to explore this. And so it kind of prolongs actually becoming an independent adult. Yeah, Larry.
When we talk about inexperience with making big decisions, this question would actually apply to several other of the bullet points here, but I'm curious if there has been any research, if there are any resources available that talk about their inability to make big decisions because of the inordinate amount of information and their inability to distinguish or to determine which is the right source. Right? And I know there's a lot of conversation about truth and finding your truth and all these different kind of things. And so the whole idea that they don't even know where to go to find truth. Yeah. And as a result of that, that may lead to their inability to make decisions because of the confusion.
Yeah, I would say exactly that's very much it, where it's this plurality of opinions and cultures or worldviews are pressed upon them. So how do you choose which way to go? How do you grab a hold of something? Because everyone's saying their own thing is right and true. It's kind of confusing on how to actually set a path and a course and follow that.
Yeah. And when you get the whole idea that's been around for a long time about, hey, we're all trying to get to the same place. Yeah. Right? So Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, it doesn't really matter as long as you pick one. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's exactly that confusion of what's in worldview. What exactly is right? So they end up with a confusing path of actually how to go, actually which way to go. An earlier starting line. This is going to tie in a little bit to what Larry was talking about. So we've seen an earlier onset of puberty and kids being exposed to like pornographic images and things like that at an earlier point in time. Interestingly enough, for people who have children this age, I've heard that the first time a kid probably hears about sex is at 7 years old from school or a friend. And so it's like on us to really control that conversation. But these things are being thrown on them earlier. It's the sports world is getting increasingly more competitive at an earlier and earlier age. There's extracurricular activities for preschoolers. I couldn't imagine, there was things that we could sign up Naomi for to do after school on in the mornings. I was like, man, the girl's tired when she gets home. I don't know about that. So in college prep, at an 8th grade, right? So there's these big things that are really being kind of handed over. And this is the thing is it's, here, there's this thing, you should do it, right? And decisions are kind of made for them. Here, you want to do this, you want to do this, you want to do this. And so when it gets time to make their own decisions, it gets a little bit I've always been told that I should do this thing. Is that what I want to do? And in a crisis of I don't know how to make this decision because the decision's been made for me. I'll get you in a minute, Troy. They have constant global access to their phones, said that already. So they know what's happening globally way earlier than any of us ever did, in a lot of ways. So there's an active effect, and the results of the, here you go. They have a stressful delay in identity development. 13 to 17-year-olds are actually rated to feel extreme stress more than adults. And in that, their faith and identity are, so because of the regiments in the day, whatever it is, teenagers, they kind of put their faith, their identity in this lockbox, set it off to the side so that doesn't mess with everything else that they've got going on. Does that make sense? They may have a faith, but that just stays there. It has no impact on the rest of my life. My identity, I can just kind of deal with later. I need to take care of all this stuff. And it's just because there's so much on their plate. We've got a frustrating quest for belonging. Social media provides connection, yet highlights exclusion. It's been an interesting thing of like, they go to social media primarily to connect with people, but people are also putting on Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, hey, I went and hung out with these people last night. I did this with these people. I did this with these people. And this young person may not have been included in it. So it highlights the fact that they were left out. They were excluded from whatever was happening. Sexual activity becomes something that they start trying for this connection, this belonging, this community. And so it provides the touch, yet it results in regret, inevitably. The highest survey results of students who, had been sexually active said that they regretted doing that, in high school. And so it just creates more stress, more frustration, and then a confusing path to purpose. They want to change the world. There are times with that whole decision-making process issue, they don't know how to do it. They get really confused. They give up on it. They're unsure what truth to crusade, like we were talking about. There's so many things out there that they're not sure what actually to pursue and help the world with. So you can see there's confusion, there's stress, there's crisis, there's frustration. Have any of you ever felt this? There are things we can empathize with them on. So I've got a lot more information. I knew I probably wasn't going to get into it. There's results of stuff. Barna Group, there's 2 books they did. There's the first volume that is a look at the next generation. They did volume 2 in late 2019. So it's like, it's late 2020. I can't remember. Anyways, it's post like lockdown, like major lockdown stuff. So it's interesting information. I'll send all this to you because we just don't have the time. Something really interesting I want to go back to. Half of them want, happiness is their ultimate goal in life. They want to be happy. They frame that in the context of success is number one. They want to be successful in whatever they're doing. They're having trouble being successful because of unsure what to do about it. That makes sense. There's the frustration. Family's a big deal. Education's a big deal. You can see what's really important to them in that way. So different is expected, regularly interact with people who are different from themselves. There's just plurality of interaction. The big thing with raising Gen Z is we need to be authentic. They see through us like, window. They want truth from us. They're looking for something, a path to follow, because there's so many things out there. They're confused. You be authentic and show them a path. Be honest about our walk, our struggles, our life, our faith. Be willing to share that. Be humble and get down. I love the story of Jesus cleansing the leper, because Jesus could have said, "You're healed, go away," but Jesus gets down, touches the leper, and heals him. It's humility, stepping down, empathizing with them, and helping them out. Be on their level. We'll talk more next week about they want to be journeyed with. They want to go along with us. They want us to go along with them in their journey. They don't want to be handed answers. They want to be walked with. Does that make sense? And be caring. Be just empathetic. Troy?
Yeah, just an observation here after having listened to all of this. I think it is definitely important to look and see the specifics of each generation and what they are looking for, looking at, and how to see things through their eyes. But when it comes right down to it, all 4 of those things that you put up there are things that we should have been doing in every generation.
Yeah.
Why should we should be authentic. We should be humble. We should be caring. We should be, what was the first one, loving. Yeah. And all those things. And I'm not trying to diminish it all. No. But these are generalizations. The first thing to mention, they're all generalizations.
Sure.
That are valuable.
Yeah.
And that we should be aware of. But then we shouldn't be overwhelmed by it. Because when it comes right down to it, the way you interact with people has been the way we interact with people from time to the beginning. Right. From the beginning of time.
Yeah, I think what's important that is to recognize they are in crisis. They've got stress, confusion, stress that has been before not been seen really. There's confusion over what they should be doing in life. Because of their interactions with so many different worldviews and cultures and things like that, and they're looking for people to journey with them. They want that, and they're looking for stability, community, belonging in that.
It's an interesting perspective that you just mentioned, that they're looking for someone to journey with them.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the whole identity crisis that's been going on, if that's not at least a significant part of it, insofar as in generations past, it was about bringing the younger generation along with us.
Yeah.
And now that's, based on the way he says, it's kind of reverse. It's about they want us to come with them.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if there doesn't need to be some type of a perspective change, because that's our responsibility as the older, quote unquote, generation, right?
Yeah.
Supposedly the more mature generation is that we're supposed to be raising them up and
Come with us.
and to come with us, instead of us coming with them.
Yeah.
So it's a question, it's a curiosity.
Yeah.
How and when did that take place?
Right. Yeah. Vanessa.
I think we only have just a minute. I think it's interesting just what Mr. O'Leary just said. When I was younger, and I would be considered Gen X.
Okay.
Yeah. 70, I was going 70, whatever.
X, yeah.
Anyway, I can remember wanting my mom and dad to get a computer so they could email with me. And they're like, I don't want to do that. You know, they don't want to get on the internet. They didn't want to send anything. Just pick up the phone and call. You know, I'm like, no, Mom, this is so cool. Email. You know, and then it was, oh, well, you can use Windows and now you can, oh, Mom, look, I can see you through the computer. Get this camera. No, absolutely not. I mean, but I'm thinking about what you said. I'm trying to bring, you know, I'm trying to get them to come with me.
Yeah.
So have we not been doing this in a
Sure.
way?
I think it's already, there's been a mixture of that happening for a long time.
That made me, I just remember my mom going, no cameras.
Yeah. I think the crux of it is that it's the community, the partnership with someone. I think that's a big deal. Like I said, they want stability. They want truth. They want a path. They want something they can hold on to. They're improving. They want to build. The whole thing with the artists is they want to rebuild society, right? And so after the crisis and the melt up and all that. And so they're looking innately. They're just
use some of that to our advantage.
Exactly. The truth we carry to them is important. My homework for you this week is to, on the back there, find someone in Gen Z, talk with them. If you don't have the ability to do that, watch some of those videos and see what you think. Look past some, maybe, the differences, or maybe note the differences, see how you can reconcile it, but look for the similarities and see how you can leverage those similarities. Thanks for hanging in there. This was an intense lesson, but I appreciate it. I'm going to say a quick prayer and then we'll be done. Father, thank you for our time together this morning. Thank you for just this charge of raising up people who will disciple after you. Father, I pray that we will journey alongside this next generation to help them come to have faith in you. May we be constantly seeking to bring you into their lives in any way possible. Father, may you just bring stability, truth, a foundation to them that they might stand on and launch into a lifelong devotion to you. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.